Okay, so like I mentioned, my name is A.J. Dixon. I'm a student advisor here with the Renison English Language Institute, and this is our do's and don'ts of PowerPoint presentation. So helping you understand what are some of the good things you should do when you're delivering a presentation and you're using Microsoft PowerPoint to help you facilitate that presentation, as well as some of the don'ts, some of the things you shouldn't be doing. So we'll go through this together. To have some best practices, some things to avoid, and we'll also show an example of a PowerPoint presentation that I think is fairly close to what you want to try to mimic or emulate when you're delivering a presentation. Okay. So when we ask ourselves what makes a good PowerPoint presentation, there's a few things we want to keep in mind. So a good PowerPoint presentation supports the speaker. What does that mean? So the slides are there to provide a visual aid to better illustrate what the speaker is trying to share with you orally, like through speaking. They shouldn't be the main event. That's the speaker, and we'll talk about that more later in the presentation. But your slides should be supporting what the speaker has to say. It shouldn't be the only thing the audience is focusing on. The primary focus should be the speaker. PowerPoint slides show a story, so there needs to be a natural kind of outline to the slides. Introduction, body slides, kind of supporting evidence that supports the speaker, and then a concluding slide that gives the audience a summary of what was discussed, as well as a chance to ask questions, and we'll talk about that more. And then clarifies information. And this point's important because if your slides are vague or confusing, you're just going to confuse your audience, and they're going to be focusing more on what they don't understand about the slides rather than what you have to say, which is the opposite of what you want. You want the slides to be clarifying what you're sharing through your speech, not giving the audience more questions. Okay, so we'll go through this next section and we'll go through do's and don'ts. So I'll share a do, that is something you should do when you're delivering a PowerPoint presentation, as well as don'ts, things you should not do when you're delivering a PowerPoint presentation. Do use a consistent theme. So what is a theme? Well, it's just how your slides look. It could be the color, font, typeface, how the slides are laid out. They should be consistent across all of your slides. So your PowerPoint should use 1 or 2 fonts maximum. We'll explain why using more than that is a bad idea in a minute. But for consistency, to get a professional look, you should use just a couple of fonts, maybe one font for the heading for your slides, and then another font for the body text. So for example, in this slide deck theme that I'm using, the Renison University College theme, we have a consistent background. It's kind of a light green, a green bold impact font at the top where our heading is, and then Calibri, a nice sans serif font for the body text that's easy to read. So yeah, we're using a consistent color scheme, and we're using consistent background for our content slides. Now, that doesn't mean you can't share images or graphs. Those are very important, actually, and we'll talk about why later on. So yes, please do use those in moderation, but it should be like when you open a magazine or a book. It should be the same with your PowerPoint slides. There should be a consistent theme from one slide to the next. It would be very jarring if you were reading a book and on one page there was one typeface, the next page another, and it's a different color. It would be difficult to read and distracting. Which takes us to our don't. Don't use a lot of fonts and colors. So we have a little bit of a silly heading at the top here to illustrate our point. But as you can see, using multiple fonts and colors is distracting. You're probably more focused on what are all these crazy fonts and colors than what I actually have to say. It just looks, chaotic. There's no unifying theme. It's difficult to read. So like I said, your audience is going to be more focused on why is he using all these different colors and fonts? What does it mean? And they'll be more focused on that than the content of what you have to say. So just to summarize, consistent fonts, so using the same fonts, the same colors shows professionalism. If you don't do that, you're going to become across as unprofessional to your audience, and it'll be distracting. And we have an example picture here of someone who's kind of taken it to the extreme to illustrate a point. You see there's pictures that don't really have much to do with the slides. There's all these different colors and underline and bold. It's hard to read and it's distracting. So that's something you want to avoid. Now back to a do. We do want to use relevant visual aids. So what's a visual aid? It could be like this, like a pie chart or graph. It could be a picture. It could be a table, anything that gives clarity to the information you're speaking about. So it just provides that little bit more detail, gives the audience a visual to better understand what you're saying. But they should be relevant. So you saw in the previous slide, they had a little picture of a kitty cat that really had nothing to do with the content of the slide. So that was not relevant. So you want to make sure your slides are relevant, as in they're related to what you're trying to share. Good visual aids enhance your presentation and maintain the audience interest. So, human beings are visual creatures. We see a chart or a graph or a picture, and our eyes are immediately going to be drawn to it. So you want to make the most of those visual aids. And, you're going to be explaining the visual aids through your speech, so what you're trying to share by speaking. You don't want to have a lot of text associated with it. That's your job. You're there to explain. But the visual aid should give useful information that helps the audience have a better mental picture of the concept you're trying to share. Don't use flashy animations. You'll see we have all these crazy animations here for everything. Flashy animations and transitions distract your audience. So having goofy kind of bouncing and twirling transitions and animations will come across as unprofessional to your audience. They think you're just trying to have a laugh and that you're not taking your presentation seriously. So instead, we want to use subtle transitions like fade or appear. So they give a slight visual interest, like the text will fade in softly and subtly. But it's not the main focus of what your audience sees. It's just a little bit of a light kind of veneer of animation that gives your presentation a little bit more professional look. But no twirling, no bouncing, no crazy, checkerboard animations. Those come across as unprofessional and they should be avoided at all costs. Do use white space. What is white space? So we have a visual here to kind of explain. So you'll see, even just looking at these slides, most of the slide, there's 4 of them here, so they're part of a consistent theme, but most of the slide is empty space. So that's what we mean by white space. It doesn't literally have to be white as in the color. It just means space that's not filled with text or a visual aid. So using white space effectively kind of creates a frame around your text and your images. And it makes the content easier to see. Because if your slide was full of text and full of pictures with very little empty space, it would be very difficult for your audience to read it and it would be distracting, or they might just tune you out. They're like, there's too much information here. I'm not paying attention. Hopefully the speaker will tell me what's important. And that's not what you want. You want the slides to be a subtle support to you. You don't want it to be a distraction. And like I said, using that empty space, that white space effectively, better draws your audience attention to the actual text or image content that you're trying to share. Don't write an essay. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, I'll give you an example right here and now. So To avoid a very bored looking audience, we want to avoid what I'm doing with all of this text. So you'll see I have basically a few paragraphs and sentences here that the audience will try to start reading because that's what we naturally do. We look at a bunch of text and we want to start reading it. But remember, in a PowerPoint presentation, you're supposed to be the focus, not the audience. So if the audience has to sit there reading through a bunch of text, they might start thinking, why am I doing this? Why couldn't he just share a handout? Why couldn't I just get an email about this? If I have to do all this reading, what's the point of me being here? It's the speaker's job to explain what's important. So you want to avoid doing what I've done on this slide, which is having a ton of text, because that's going to bore your audience. They're going to stop reading and they're going to fall asleep. That's what we don't want. We do, however, want to come prepared. So remember, PowerPoint presentations, the PowerPoint is not the focus. You are the focus. You, the speaker, are the focus. PowerPoints are just a tool to support you. So you're the main event. Your slides are just supporting actors. So you need to prepare ahead of time like you would for any other speech. So you might want to have some notes on index cards. PowerPoint also has the slide note feature where you can type in notes that are attached with each slide and print that off if that's easier for you. But you need to be preparing as you would for any other speech because your PowerPoint is just there to give a visual aid to what you have to say. You're the main event. And remember too, to watch the clock. It's very easy in PowerPoint and with speeches in general to go over time. So if you're using PowerPoint slides to support you with your presentation, you want to budget approximately 1 minute of speaking per slide. I wouldn't recommend any more than that because A, you're probably more likely to go over time, but B, you're also going to bore your audience because they're expecting the next slide to come up and for that next slide to have additional information related to what you have to say. Which takes me to my next point. Don't read off of your slides. So don't do what it looks like this gentleman is doing here. Your slides are a visual aid. They are not your script. So what do we mean by that? You shouldn't just be reading word for word off of your slides because A, that's going to be very boring for your audience. But B, you're likely to do what this gentleman's doing here. You're just going to start turning and reading from it. So you're not engaging with your audience and you're turning your slides into the focal point, which is not what you want. You want to be the focal point of your PowerPoint presentation. You want your audience to focus on you and what you have to say. And like I said, use index cards, use slide notes, practice with a friend or family member ahead of time so that you can work on your delivery and make your presentation audibly and visually interesting and not just a bunch of pictures and words that you're reading from. Do summarize your main points. So you should dedicate a slide, usually your concluding slide or your summary slide, to have a bullet by bullet summary of your main points. Why should you do this? Well, just like with an essay where you would wrap up your arguments with a concluding paragraph explaining why all the evidence and information that you've shared is important, you want to do the same thing with a speech. You want to leave them with some quick points that they can remember about what is important about what you have to say. So summary concluding slide can take various forms. Could have a visual aid like this, like a chart of some sort. But the main thing is you want to quickly condense, summarize your points so that it's easy for your audience to remember why they're listening to you in the first place. Don't leave your audience guessing. Well, what do we mean by that? Anytime you're listening to a public speaker, whether or not they have PowerPoint slides, there's probably a lot of information they're sharing that's hopefully getting your audience thinking. And if they're thinking, hopefully, they're going to be asking themselves some questions. And if they have questions that they can't answer, you want to make sure that you're giving space and time for them to answer your questions. So part of coming prepared to your presentation is making sure that you can kind of anticipate what some of the audience's questions might be. So hopefully you're prepared for when they do have questions and you can answer them to the best of your ability. But it's also okay to remember to say, you know, I don't know, or that's an interesting question. Let me look into that and get back to you. So a lot of presentations, the speaker will share contact information at the end so that the person asking the question can continue the conversation after the presentation is over. So that's something, again, to make sure that that'll keep the audience's interest, is because you're showing them that you're there to help further their understanding and that you're willing to make time and space to answer their questions and keep engaging them. Okay, so we're going to switch gears here to a sample PowerPoint presentation where I'm going to show you kind of some of these points that we've talked about, how they've been put into practice. Just bear with me just a moment. Okay, so I'm using what I think is probably one of my better PowerPoint slide decks, and that's the Online Learning Strategies mini workshop. So see here, I have my title slide, and as we go through, you're going to see that there's this consistent theme that I'm using, kind of blue background, with white text headings and then green text for emphasis. So you'll see a consistent theme all the way through the slide deck. So I start by kind of asking the audience a question to kind of get them thinking and showing that this is supposed to be more of an interactive process. So you're giving the audience a rhetorical question. Of course, you can also invite discussion if you do have time for that. But you're getting the audience thinking about why what they're about to hear might be important. Why is this presentation important? Okay, so going through here, I'm not going to go through the content because that would just be in a whole other workshop. So I'm not going to do that. But I am going to show you what some of the things, some of the best practices that I'm doing. So I have a visual aid here. It's just a picture, just stock photography of a woman working at a computer. But it relates to the topic, learning online. So it's a relevant image. And then you'll see we have just a few short bullet points. I'm not reading off of the slides. It's just getting the audience thinking about why this topic might be important. We said use no more than 5 bullet points. So we have, I think, 4 here. So we're sticking well within that margin. So continue to ask follow-up questions. The slide format is similar to the initial question slide, so we're maintaining a consistent theme, which is great. So again, just a few short bullet points, relevant image talking about distractions related to learning online, something that most people can relate to watching Netflix or streaming video. So it's helping this content seem more relevant, more personal to the audience member. Okay, so again, you can use your themes effectively to kind of show how different sections of the presentation are related to different types of content. So this next section is about maximizing the benefits and minimizing the drawbacks of learning online. So we had a kind of a subtitle slide to show, okay, we're switching into a new section. And talking about summarizing points, we start with kind of an introductory summary of some of the important things to remember. So this is kind of like a mini outline for this section of slides. I'm going to talk about structuring time, organizing my life, communicating often, asking for help. So I'm giving the audience kind of a sneak preview, a little bit like a table of contents about what these next slides are about. But I'm keeping it short. You know, I don't have 10 points here, I have 4 points. So it's easy for the audience to keep track of what we're going to discuss. Again, just a few short points, relevant image of a house falling down. Why is that important when we're talking about time management? It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for what happens if we don't structure our time well. We think of our life as a house. If that house doesn't have good structure, if our life doesn't have good structure, we fall down. So that's why the image is relevant. It makes something that's not that's hard to visualize, something like time, a little bit more concrete, a little bit more relatable to our daily lives. Continuing, a few short bullet points about different organizational tools, as well as a visual aid that shows a day planner. So again, keeping it on topic. I'm just going to skip ahead here. You'll see again, consistent theme that I'm using. You see I am using animation, so I will stop and focus on that. They are slowly fading in each time I go to a new point. So digital folders, cloud backup drive services, file folders and boxes. So it's subtly fading in. I don't have a bunch of crazy animations popping up, twirling across the screen, but I am using animations effectively because I'm only talking about the point that's appearing. So the audience isn't thinking about the next 2 points because they haven't come up on the slide yet. So I'm using those subtle animations to maintain the audience's focus. Okay. So just skipping ahead a little bit here. Again, you'll see not too many points, not too much text, just little bits of text for the audience to focus on. And then we'll see here that you'll see that, I'm using about 5 or 6 different slide layouts, but they're all part of a consistent theme. So we always have that light blue, dark blue background, always the white text, and green for emphasis. For example, for this URL to click on for making a meetup, we want to emphasize that so that the audience remembers what the website is to book an online meetup. Okay. And then you'll see here's our summary concluding slide where we go over again the important points of the presentation. So you'll see I use those subtle animations to slowly fade in point 1, point 2, point 3, and point 4. So I'm really just repeating kind of that introductory slide where I explained the 4 strategies we're going to use, and I'm leaving the audience with those 4 strategies. Also, I give them space to ask questions, as well as provide my contact information if they want to book a meeting or send me an email with questions. Okay. So, and I am going to be sharing both the main PowerPoint slides as well as the sample PowerPoint presentation, just so you can get an idea of what's a good practice to use and what is not. All right. So some helpful resources. I've been using PowerPoint for probably over 20 years now, since high school, and there's still new things I'm learning. So a lot of these office programs, we think they're relatively simple, but they actually have a lot of depth, and it can take some time to learn all the ins and outs and all the cool tricks we can use for each type of software. A really helpful resource that I found, it's not from UW, it's from a college in Eastern Ontario called Algonquin College, but they have some really great Microsoft Office tutorials, and they're just short videos. So if you're like, okay, well, how do I set up animations in PowerPoint, or how do I select a theme or a template? The Microsoft Office tutorials on the Algonquin College website have these short videos that show you how to do it. And what's nice about it too is obviously there's a few different versions of Office out there, but they have multiple types of videos so that you should be able to find one that's the same as the one a type of Office you're using, or at least close to it. Okay, so to summarize, using my summary point slide, for an effective PowerPoint presentation, remember the do's and don'ts. So I'm using a table here to kind of provide some visual structure for my summarizing points. So do use a consistent theme. You saw with the sample PowerPoint as well as this PowerPoint, that most of the slides have a similar color scheme. They're using similar types of fonts. It just looks more professional. Use relevant visual aids. So whether it's a table like this, whether it's a graph, whether it's a picture, just make sure that the visual aid you're using relates to what you're saying. You want to use white space effectively. So even on this slide, most of it is actually empty space. You might not think so, but even within the table, there's lots of empty space so that it's easy to read the text. That empty space, that white space, helps your audience focus on the content more easily. Come prepared to present. Use index cards, use slide notes, practice your presentation in front of a friend, a classmate, a family member, so that you are prepared. Because like we said earlier, you are the focus of the presentation. It's not your slides. Your slides are there to support you. They're there to clarify, but they're not the main event. You are the main event. So you need to come prepared to present. And finally, at the end, just like this, summarize your main points so that your audience remembers what to do. Don't use a lot of different fonts and colors. You saw that slide we had earlier. We had about 8 or 9 different colors and about probably 20 different fonts. It's very distracting. Your audience is going to think you're either making a joke, you're not taking it seriously, or they're just going to think you're not very professional. Same with flashy animations. Again, subtle animations like the slow fade or the slow transition from slide to slide, that's okay. But a lot of bouncing, checkerboard, loop-de-loop transitions, those again come across as unprofessional. It's distracting, less likely that your audience will take you seriously. Don't use more than 5 bullet points. Again, if your audience is seeing a big paragraph of text and you're reading from it, which relates to the next point, reading off of your slides, it's going to be very boring for them, and it's going to be hard to maintain their interest. They might be thinking, why didn't I just read a book about this? And finally, don't leave your audience guessing. Make sure they have time and space for questions or any concerns they might have, and also share your contact information so that you can keep the conversation going. Which takes us to our last slide. If you have any questions about what you want to learn today, we'll take the next few minutes to do that. Or you're welcome to book a meetup with me or a peer leader at uwaterloo.ca/ELI/meet-up. Okay, so I'm going to stop my share here. I'm going to stop recording as well.